Welcome. It was working a second ago. Now it's working. Here we go. So I'm going to have to knock this out in probably what is an unrealistic time frame, but I got to do this in about 15 to 20 minutes. I have quite a few pages of material to read. What is this material? Well, using what I know with, already, covering debunking of Bob Lazar and all of that, and combined with stuff that I know and everything. I formulated questions to ask AI so that it could provide a nice intelligent response, even cite examples and so forth, give names and dates to things, and just give a nice tidy response based on the things that I'm aware of. So, anyways, and I also gleaned a bit more interesting evidence and information to help further substantiate the debunking. So, that's what I mean by the material that I'm going to read. So it's quite a few questions that I asked it. So it's not just going to be my opinion. This is going to be the unbiased opinion of AI, a really good AI. And here we go. So I will not be addressing anything to do with Bob Lazar, him personally, his life, anything in his life, whatever, anything outside of the scope of UFO ET, his claims to do with UFO and ET, right? So anything to do with him outside of aliens, I'm not here to talk about. Um, Whether there is stuff that would be relevant or not, I'm not even going to get into it. So for this video, I'm going to focus on the debunking of his claims to do with ET and UFO, that exclusively. Okay, and this is nothing against Bob Lazar as a person. Okay, seems like a nice guy, right? He seems like the typical. I used to be a nerd in school, like a nerdy person who likes. I'm proud to be a nerd, right? It's good to be smart. You know what I mean? You like sci-fi and space, and you like the idea of UFOs and aliens. So I can relate to Bob on that. Whether he's telling the truth in his claims or not's another story, and that's what we're here to talk about here today. This isn't an attack on Bob as a person, anything like that. It's got nothing to do with him as a person. I just want to stress this. It's just about his claims. Okay, so here we go. So I'll just call this the Bob Lazar large debunk. Okay, there's a lot of people out there who believe Bob Lazar. I used to as well. But like I did with all the other prominent figures in UFOlogy, I did a lot of extra research, looking for pros and cons, the good and the bad, and so forth, as I do with everybody. Did with Bob Lazar, and this is what I found over the years, and this is the compilation of evidence. So, uh, to start off with, element 115, which is now known as Moscovium. Okay, so this wasn't discovered naturally on Earth, but scientists predicted its existence well before it was synthesized in a lab. And just in case anybody pops in, they don't know, I am reading the response of AI, like I worded better before. Okay, where I asked it intelligent questions, and it provided the answers to give names, dates, and specifics and so forth. Okay, unbiased AI. Anyways, so this is not my own words, right? But this stuff, the vast majority of everything I'm going to go through, I'm aware of. That's why I want to do this little project. But anyways, so element 115 wasn't discovered naturally on Earth, but scientists predicted its existence well before it was synthesized in a lab. To help us track down when scientists first started thinking about these super heavy elements in theory, let's start with the broader concept. Do you know which the pioneering do you know which pioneering chemist published the first widely recognized periodic table establishing the method of predicting undiscovered elements? Okay, so here's the full history and timeline of how element 115, now Moscovium, was hypothesized and predicted. Systematic Periodic Table Predictions, 1869. The theoretical groundwork for predicting unknown elements began with Dmitry Mendeleev in 1869. He was a genius. I added that he was a genius, right? But by arranging elements by atomic weight and periodic properties, he demonstrated that elements could be hypothesized long before their discovery. And I will add this is because there's patterns, easily recognizable patterns. When you look at the periodic table, even though it's an arbitrary designed construct of dimensions, it's like this wide, this many rows wide, this many columns, and so forth. Even though that's an arbitrary selected value by humans, the fact is that this chemistry, the physics and the chemistry of this is a pattern in nature that is observable, right? And that's what scientists have done. They've observed each element has whatever it is. I think one proton or whatever more than the prior element, right? And in order to have one more proton, you have to have more and less of the corresponding other things, right? Like electrons, neutrons, and so forth. And there's even deeper stuff, right? But it's a little complex, but there's predictable patterns, right? And they'd already mapped out like nearly 100 elements, around the 1900s or whatever. They'd already, I think, gotten, I think it was about the low 90s to be more accurate. Basically speaking, about 100 elements. We're only talking about the next 20 or so, right? They took a little bit more technology and stuff to make in the lab, but these things were all predicted because the patterns are there in nature. And I'm speaking for myself here, right, at this point. But starting with Dmitry Mendeleev in 1869, okay? So, anyways, he demonstrated that elements could be hypothesized long before their discovery. Element 115 sits in group 15, the pnictogens, directly below bismuth, making its chemical properties predictable based on periodic trends, sometimes historically referred to as ecobismuth. Second point, the physical basis via the atomic number. This was in 1913 to 1923. Henry Moseley established in 1913 that an element's identity is defined by its atomic number, the number of protons. By 1923, following the discovery of atomic structure, physicists realized that the periodic table had no theoretical upper limit at element 92, which was uranium, implicitly predicting that elements with higher atomic numbers, including 115, could theoretically exist if synthesized. Point three, the modern prediction. The island of stability hypothesis, which was from the late 1960s, the explicit prediction that element 115 could actually exist with a measurable half-life rather than decaying instantaneously, came in the late 1960s. So again, this is the foundation for understanding the rebuttal against Bob Lazar's claims of him discovering, not literally, but him discovering element 115, him bringing it to the public's knowledge, right, for the first time. Like, that's myth. He didn't, right? A lot of that story is mythical, right, and a fallacy, right? But anyways, so the like it says here, the prediction that element 115 could actually exist with a measurable half-life rather than decaying instantaneously came in the late 1960s. It didn't need to wait till the late 1980s with Bob Lazar to bring it to public mind, right? So going on, physicists such as Glenn Seaborg, Sven Gosta Nilsson, and Yuri Oganessian developed a nuclear shell model. They predicted an island of stability around super heavy elements with specific magic numbers of protons and neutrons, magic numbers. During this period, specifically around 1968 to 1969, detailed theoretical calculations explicitly predicted the nuclear structure, expected isotopes, and chemical properties of element 115. This is in the 60s, right? So Bob Lazar didn't discover or make us aware of element 115. The public and science had known about it decades prior, right? But it's always been said that he discovered, so to speak, element 115. Right? Anyways, final answer, it says element 115 was implicitly predicted with the formulation of the modern periodic table, but it was originally and explicitly hypothesized in detail in the late 1960s through the development of the island of stability theory in nuclear physics. Next, the scientific reality. At the time of Lazar's initial 1989 claims, element 115 had not yet been synthesized. Years later, in 2003, researchers successfully synthesized element 115, which was officially named moscovium in 2016. However, contrary to Lazar's assertions about a stable, usable isotope, all known isotopes of moscovium are extremely unstable, radioactive, and undergo radioactive decay within milliseconds. It is scientifically impossible for a stable isotope of element 115 to exist naturally in a form that could power a long-term propulsion reactor. Contrary to Lazar's assertions of stability, moscovium is extremely radioactive and unstable. Its known isotopes have half-lives lasting only a few hundred milliseconds before decaying via alpha emission into lighter elements. There is no known physics mechanism or isotopic configuration that permits a stable island of element 115 capable of operating as a long-term gravitational power source. Next, gravity amplification in the element 115 gravity waves. Lazar described a complex mechanism whereby element 115 is bombarded with protons, causing it to decay or transmute into another element, which then releases a specific type of radiation that he termed gravity waves. Going on, Lazar's scientific claim. He claimed that these gravity waves could be amplified and directed to bend spacetime, allowing spacecraft to achieve instantaneous acceleration, bypass the speed of light, nullify the effects of massive gravitational pulls or inertia on passengers inside the craft. The scientific reality, however, In modern physics, gravity is described by Albert Einstein's general theory of relativity as the curvature of space-time caused by mass energy, rather than a force generated by a simple chemical element or particle radiation. Gravitational waves do exist in physics. They were directly detected by the LIGO scientific collaboration. Yeah, scientific collaboration in 2015, but they are ripples in the fabric of space-time produced by cataclysmic cosmic events such as colliding black holes or neutron stars. They carry enormous amounts of energy across the universe, yet their local interaction with matter is extraordinarily weak. They cannot be generated, focused, or harnessed by a small reactor containing heavy chemical elements inside a compact vehicle to manipulate local gravity or cancel inertia. Right? So, in effect, dumbing it down. When it's talking about the gravity waves, the real gravity waves that they know are real and have detected, these are like ripples. If the universe was like a pond, they're like ripples that are taking place. It's gravity that's in the universe, like rippling out throughout the universe, right? Gravity is not something that is generated, it's saying, by an element, right? At the that type of micro level, it's something that's taking place with black holes colliding out in outer space. That's the only time they're waves, and they're not waves like, oh, it's something emanating, a gravity wave emanating from a particle. No, it's cold gravity waves because it's gravity in outer space that is doing this type of peculiar action. That's the only reason why it's called gravity waves. The reality is completely different from the fairy tale that Bob Lazar painted. Right, going on, the sports model propulsion and antimatter reactor. Lazar provided detailed breakdowns of the internal engineering of the saucer's propulsion reactor, claiming it operated on an annihilation reaction that produced high-frequency waves. Lazar's scientific claim. According to Lazar, the element 115 reactor acts as an antimatter source, where matter is completely converted into energy, heating a gas that is routed through waveguides to emit gravity waves from the bottom-mounted emitters of the craft. However, the scientific reality is controlled antimatter reactions require massive particle accelerators, such as those at CERN, which are like miles long, and vast amounts of energy to produce and contain just microscopic quantities of positrons or antiprotons in ultra high vacuum magnetic traps called Penning traps. The notion of a desktop sized or cabin sized cabin sized reactor running continuously on stable super heavy antimatter mechanics violates thermodynamics and nuclear physics principles. Furthermore, energy conversion via matter antimatter annihilation produces intense gamma radiation rather than directed macroscopic gravity waves. Next, falsified academic and professional credentials. Let me take a breath for a second. I'm going to talk so much I need to get some oxygen. Okay, falsified academic and professional credentials. To give weight to his technical expertise, Lazar claimed to hold advanced academic degrees, a master's degree in physics from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and a master's degree in electronics from the California Institute of Technology. He also positioned himself as a trained physicist who worked directly in that capacity at major research institutions. The institutional record, however, extensive archival investigations by journalists and scientists, including Stanton Friedman and Donald R. Prothero, revealed zero records of Lazar ever attending MIT or Caltech. He could not name any professors or fellow students from those institutions either, meaning Lazar couldn't. If you went to class with people, I mean, surely you can name at least one or two people from class and validate that you were there if you want people to believe that you were there. Right. But anyways, furthermore, records show that he attended Pierce Junior College in Los Angeles during times he claimed to be at MIT. Regarding his tenure at the Los Alamos National Laboratory, employment verification confirmed he worked merely as a contract technician rather than a staff physicist. Bob Lazar has frequently discussed the heavy. I mean, this is the minor point. People say, oh, they wiped the records. Even if they wipe records, there's other things that wouldn't have been wiped that should still be traceable, like friends, contacts. There's so much other stuff in the background that would have been traceable if he actually went there, but there's nothing traceable because he didn't go there, right? That's the thing. But even still, the education is a insignificant point in all of this, because the very things that he talks about is what is debunkable. Right, the education. I mean, maybe he had real degrees. I mean, at this point here, who really cares? It's irrelevant compared to the rest of the debunking, right? It's literally just irrelevant, right? But just pointing it out. But anyways, Bob Lazar has frequently discussed the heavy legal and security constraints surrounding his alleged employment at S4, often pointing to severe intimidation and government oversight when explaining why he cannot share certain details or documents. Within the UFOlogy and conspiracy theory communities, Lazar's narrative has consistently included references to threats of violence, surveillance, and government imposed secrecy. While whistleblowers and investigators like journalist George Knapp have explored these restrictions, mainstream historians, skeptics, and investigative researchers, maybe ancient alien theorists say yes as well. No, I'm just joking. Right? But mainstream historians, skeptics, and investigative researchers emphasize that Lazar has never produced a verifiable, legally binding non disclosure agreement or any official documentation proving his employment within a classified military program. Instead, skeptics argue that claims of secret government silencers, erased educational records, and restrictive security oaths serve as a convenient narrative shield to deflect the lack of verifiable proof regarding his purported scientific credentials and his extraordinary claims about reverse engineering extraterrestrial technology. The accounts provide, and I'll be jumping to some other topics here. So the accounts provided by Swiss contactee Billy Meyer and former government contractor Bob Lazar share striking and frequently cited visual and structural similarities regarding the. And by the way, Billy Meyer is well-known exposed fraud hoaxer, right? In case you didn't know, and we're going to see a lot of strong connections between Meyer and Lazar here, right? But anyways, going on. Not saying they work together, but one copied the other. Billy Meyer came first, right? But anyways, but Billy Meyer was false. But at the time, people did believe him. When Bob Lazar came out in the late '80s, people were still believing Billy Meyer. Okay, and so Bob Lazar could have been a person who he himself believed Billy Meyer's claims, and then Lazar built his own mythos upon that, basing the framework of what he's coming up with on Billy Meyer's statements and claims as if they were real, because maybe Lazar believed Billy Meyer's claims at the time in the late '80s. That's what I'm saying, and built his own Lazar mythos on top of that, based on that, right? But anyways, we're going to see undeniable similarities here, right? So even the AI said the accounts provided by the Swiss contactee Billy Meyer and former government contractor, allegedly, Bob Lazar share striking and frequently cited visual and structural similarities regarding the physical configuration of anomalous disc-shaped craft, despite originating from vastly different alleged contexts. Billy Meyer, who emerged in the 1970s claiming physical contact with Nordic extraterrestrials known as the Pleiadians or Plejaren, produced an extensive catalog of photographs, films, and physical trace evidence depicting metallic, smooth surface flying discs. Similarly, Bob Lazar stepped forward in 1989, claiming to have worked at a clandestine government site known as S4 near Area 51, where he was tasked with reverse engineering an extraterrestrial disk he famously designated as the sports model. When comparing their testimonies, I think no self-respecting military person would call a UFO the sports model. That's like pure 80s, 90s car lingo. That has no place in military craft. Sports model? What's it got? Tighter suspension? Red paint? Fancy stitching on the seats? You know what I mean? Like, no. Come on, right? Anyways. What's the other one? The off-road model? What's the other one? GT, Grand Touring model? Anyways. But going on, when comparing their testimonies, ufologists and researchers have repeatedly highlighted several notable points of convergence between Meyer and Lazar. First, the physical morphology of the craft described in the photograph by Meyer in Switzerland, particularly of his iconic 1975 photographs taken in Schmidruti, bears an astonishingly similar profile to the physical description Lazar provided of the S4 disk, much later in time when Lazar came out. Both accounts emphasize a smooth, matte metallic, saucer-shaped hull with minimal protruding features, distinct circular underside components or gravitational emitters, and an overall seamless construction that defied contemporary 20th century aviation standards, i.e. this is a disc. There's lots of discs have always been talked about. These are the discs with the lumps on the bottom, the anti-gravity lumps. Okay, it's a very unique thing. The very few have spoken about. Billy Meyer's one, Bob Lazar's one, right? Anyways, going on. Furthermore, Lazar himself acknowledged these visual parallels during archival interviews in the 1990s, noting that the aesthetic and structural design of the craft he witnessed firsthand, he says, strongly resembled the controversial imagery previously published by Meyer. There you go, out of the horse's mouth itself. Going on, beyond exterior aesthetics, thematic overlaps occasionally surface regarding the purported technological mechanics of these vehicles. Both narratives posit that the observed UFOs operate via advanced manipulation of gravity or space-time fields rather than conventional propulsion, utilizing internal wave generating systems or stable heavy elements such as element 115 in Lazar's claims to achieve frictionless flight and inertial mass reduction. Critics, however, maintain a sharp distinction between the two figures. Meyer's claims rely heavily on subjective third party testimony, spiritual philosophies, wacky ones at that, and contested physical evidence that many skeptics categorize as hoaxes, whereas Lazar's narrative is framed through the lens of compartmentalized military industrial espionage, headaches, haha, classified physics laboratories, and government whistleblowing. Nevertheless, the convergence in visual descriptions of the hardware remains one of the most intriguing comparative anomalies within modern UFOlogy. So, are there similarities? Yes, there are. Meyer came out first. Lazar obviously probably believed them. After all, he came up with UFOs just like Billy Meyer's UFOs, right? Anyways, just pointing out something. Make of it what you will yourself, right? Anyways, going on. Did Bob Lazar claim to have stolen element 115? I wanted to double check because I had heard that before. What did the AI say? Yes, indeed. But, well, it didn't say indeed. But yes, Bob Lazar claimed that he managed to acquire and remove a quantity of mysterious element 115 from the classified S4 facility near Area 51 during his time working there, eventually taking some of it home to conduct his own tests. The narrative surrounding this alleged theft is a core component. That would be nuclear material theft. Does that make you a terrorist? I'm just pointing something out. Like you're stealing nuclear material and telling people about it. There's got to be a penalty for that. You know what I mean? But anyways, right? Just going on, right? I mean, of all the things to steal, you're going to steal nuclear material, and a lot of it. But anyways, right? So the narrative surrounding this alleged theft is the core component of Lazar's broader claims regarding his recruitment, work environment, and subsequent fallout with government handlers. Oh, one sec. Hey there. Sorry, I just shrunk my windows all weird. One sec. Whoops. My bad. I just wanted to check who's coming in. Good to see you. I got to race through this really quick. Not too much more to go. So, yeah. So the narrative surrounding this alleged theft is a core component of Lazar's broader claims regarding his recruitment, work environment, and subsequent fallout with government handlers. The alleged acquisition of element 115. In 1989, when Lazar first stepped forward in televised interviews with investigative journalist George Knapp on Las Vegas TV station KLAS, initially under the pseudonym Dennis, he popularized the concept that extraterrestrial flying saucers were powered by a stable isotope of an element with atomic number 115, which had not yet been synthesized by human science at the time. I'm going to try talking in a reporter accent. According to Lazar's statements over the years, the element was utilized inside the craft's reactor as a fuel source and gravity wave generator. He claimed that the material was cast into the shape of a small, thin precision machine discs or chips. Lazar asserted that during his time working as a contractor at the S4 subsidiary facility, that he was able to pocket a portion of this material, reportedly securing a sample weighing roughly several hundred grams or a few pounds, depending on accounts, and smuggled it out of the heavily guarded base. Like James Bond, he stated that he wanted to have undeniable physical proof of the technology he was working on should anything happen to him. So why not take the nuclear material to your house? Real smart idea. Anyways, if you had a physics degree, you would know how stupid of an idea that is. But anyways, going on. Storage and subsequent events. Lazar claimed that after bringing the material home, he and a few close associates, including friend John Lear and journalist George Knapp, witnessed demonstrations of the substance's bizarre physical properties. I'm sure he was just doing some parlor tricks with them with some basic high school level physics that maybe Lear and Knapp weren't aware of, perhaps. Nothing against them. Sorry, nothing against them, but he definitely wasn't doing anything legitimate here. Such as its alleged ability to bend laser light due to intense gravitational characteristics. Well, crystals can bend laser light, so I don't know if you need to have gravity warping waves in order to do that. But anyways, you see what I mean? It was probably just parlor tricks. But anyways, decades later, the alleged presence of the stolen extraterrestrial fuel source resurfaced in popular culture. In 2018 and 19, documentary filmmaker Jeremy Corbell produced Bob Lazar, Area 51 and Flying Saucers. During the promotion of the film, Corbell claimed that an FBI raid on Lazar's chemical supply business, United Nuclear, was actually a covert operation by federal authorities. No, that is a conspiracy until proven. What really did happen? Well, I'm just stating facts, nothing against Corbell. You know what I mean? But what happened happened. To say it was something else, despite what happened, is a conspiracy, right? But anyways, Corbell said proposed it was actually a covert operation by federal authorities to search for and recover the remaining sample of element 115. Would be no need for that in the coming paragraphs, as you'll soon see, according to scientific evidence. But anyways, allegedly, they did this to try and gank the remaining sample of element 115 that Lazar was rumored to still possess. However, official law enforcement records stated that the raid was conducted as part of a murder investigation involving the illegal interstate sale of toxic chemicals such as thallium. And no element 115 was ever officially recorded or acknowledged by federal authorities. That's why it's illegal to sell certain things unless you have the proper license and legal right to do that. Right? But anyways, going on. Next thing, to evaluate the potential dangers and radioactivity of possessing a multi-pound quantity of element 115, officially named moscovium now, one must look at the intersection of nuclear physics, radioactive decay, kinetics, and real-world chemical safety limits. According to prominent historical accounts in nuclear physics literature, super heavy elements near the end of the current periodic table possess extremely short half-lives due to electrostatic repulsion overcoming the strong nuclear force within the nucleus. When considering Bob Lazar's famous claims that he handled a 115 chip weighing a substantial amount or possessing significant mass during his alleged work at Area 51's S4 facility, the laws of physics present a staggering paradox regarding stability, mass, and radioactive decay. The physics of super heavy elements and half-lives. In standard nuclear physics, as documented in authoritative texts on radiochemistry and nuclear engineering, such as Introduction to Nuclear Engineering by John LaMarche, and radiochemistry and nuclear chemistry by Gregory Chopin, Jan Olov, Lil Jensen, and Rydberg. Elements with atomic numbers above 104 are termed transactinides or super heavy elements. Moscovium element 115 has been synthesized in very minute quantities, individual atoms, in particle accelerators via fusion reactions such as bombarding americium 243 with calcium 48 ions. The most stable known isotope successfully produced in laboratories, moscovium 289, exhibits a half-life of roughly 220 to 280 milliseconds before undergoing alpha decay into nihonium, or if that it might have had a spelling mistake. I don't think there's an element called nihonium. Might be called something else, but element 113. So what happens with a few pounds of this material? A few pounds of material translates to roughly 2 kilograms or approximately however many. It scrambles up when I try to copy paste the AI response into a document. So I can't read that, but it says 2.1 times 10, I guess, to the power of 24. It's a boatload of atoms, right? 2 kilograms, that's a lot of atoms of element 115. If an isotope with a millisecond half-life were accumulated in multi-pound quantities, okay, such as element 115, the consequences would be catastrophic due to the sheer rate of radioactive disintegrations, massive energy release, thermal, and radiation. If a substance with a half-life of fractions of a second exists in kilograms, the macroscopic decay rate activity as governed by the radioactive decay law would result in astronomical amounts of disintegrations per second, becquerels. Billions of kilograms of energy would be released almost instantaneously. A few pounds of a millisecond half-life isotope would instantly vaporize itself in its container in a massive thermal explosion comparable to a thermonuclear weapon, driven by the intense release of ionizing radiation. But yet, Bob Lazar brought it home like it was a hamburger, right? Come on now, right? But anyways, if he did have a few pounds of this stuff, it wouldn't be able to exist. It would just create a thermonuclear explosion, right? Driven by intense release of ionizing radiation, primarily high-energy alpha particles, gamma rays, and spontaneous fission neutrons. The island of stability hypothesis, Lazar's defense of his claims rests on the premise that element 115 possesses an undiscovered long-lived stable or metastable isotope residing on the theoretical island of stability, a region of the nuclear chart around proton number 114 to 120 and neutron number 184, where nuclear shells are predicted to be closed, granting significantly longer half-lives ranging from minutes to millions of years. Even if such a stable or long-lived isotope was successfully isolated, holding or possessing a few pounds of it in a residential setting would still present extreme lethal radiological hazards, such as alpha and gamma toxicity. Super heavy elements undergoing alpha decay emit highly energetic particles that destroy biological tissue upon ingestion or inhalation. Furthermore, daughter products down the decay chain are frequently radioactive and volatile. Criticality and spontaneous fission. Heavy transuranic and super heavy elements have a high propensity for spontaneous fission, gathering several pounds of a heavy metal with high atomic number, risks exceeding critical mass thresholds, which would trigger an uncontrolled nuclear chain reaction, releasing lethal fluxes of neutrons and gamma radiation. Conclusion on safety and credibility. In summary, if a person, such as Bob Lazar, brought home a few pounds of the currently known laboratory synthesized isotopes of element 15, any of them, the sample would spontaneously disintegrate within milliseconds, resulting in a catastrophic radiation blast and thermal explosion that would kill the handler instantly. If, however, one assumes the existence, and any rats that are in the house, I'll mind you, I had, right? If, however, one assumes the existence of a it's not like a nuclear explosion is going to just destroy one person, is my point, right? But if, however, one assumes the existence of a hypothetical long-lived stable isotope from an undiscovered island of stability, kind of like the island where King Kong is said to live, possessing pounds of it without heavy industrial shielding, such as feet of lead and water, would expose the individual to lethal doses of radiation, causing severe radiation sickness, cellular destruction, and death within hours or days. So there's no way that he had it there, right? Going on. Next thing, the convergence of aviation heritage, classified lore, and fringe science in the late 20th century UFOlogy is epitomized by John Lear and Bob Lazar. Both figures fundamentally transformed the discourse of American conspiracy culture by steering it away from the benevolent Space Brothers narrative of the 1950s and towards a darker, highly paranoid paradigm, as I call the Dulce mythos, centered on clandestine government alien pacts and reverse engineered extraterrestrial technology. Chronology of public disclosures. The timeline of when John Lear and Bob Lazar each began sharing their UFO claims with the public is marked by distinct milestones in the late 1980s. Remember, Billy Meyer was just before that in the 70s. So Lear first began circulating his comprehensive, highly elaborate UFO claims to the public in December 1987, utilizing Paranet, an early paranormal bulletin board system. Lear posted a sweeping multi-page statement detailing a decades-long government cover-up, crash flying saucers, including Roswell, and secret treaties with gray extraterrestrials. He continuously revised and expanded this statement through August 1988 before collaborating with Bill Cooper, another person who I used to believe, and after buying his book and owning it for decades, just another person who thought they knew everything, knew very little, and spread a whole pile of paranoid baloney lies. Unfortunately, right? Just saying it how it is, right? But you will see a pattern here with all of these individuals who became prevalent in UFOlogy, i.e., prevalent in corrupting UFOlogy and tarnishing it. But anyways, so he was using Paranet, made a sweeping multi-page statement detailing decades-long government cover-up, crash flying saucers, including Roswell, and secret treaties with gray extraterrestrials. He continuously revised and expanded this statement through August 1988 before collaborating with Bill Cooper and ultimately introducing Bob Lazar to the public consciousness. Bob Lazar. Lazar began sharing his sensational claims with the public in March 1989 when he confided in John Lear, who subsequently introduced him to investigative journalist George Knapp. This culminated in Lazar's first televised Shadow Mass interview on the Las Vegas television station KLAS TV on May 15, 1989, where he spoke under the pseudonym Dennis before stepping forward publicly under his real name later that November. Skipping a portion, it's a table of comparisons. It would be interesting, but adds too much pointless time. Anyways, ultimately, Lear provided the sweeping geopolitical and historical canvas of paranoia, while Lazar provided the eyewitness technician testimony that personalized the mythology, creating a symbiotic narrative that permanently altered UFOlogy. So even the AI clearly shows that there's an undeniable connection and bond and parallel between all of these individuals, right? Without a doubt. So Meyer, Lazar, and Lear. Okay. Next, and they all fell for the Dulce mythos, which contains truths but a lot of misinformation. But they fell for it, and Bill Cooper, and Bill William Tompkins, and they all hyped up all of these things. Now, whether they're doing it on purpose as disinformationists themselves, or whether they were duped into believing it, whatever, that's for another time, right? But anyways, here's a step-by-step breakdown of why Bob Lazar's claims regarding gravity wave manipulation and anti-gravity contradict fundamental, well-established scientific principles. Misunderstanding. I mean, if you're talking it to Bob Lazar looks smart and nerdy, right? If he claims, "Oh, I have a physics degree. I worked at Area 51. Look at me. I look smart and nerdy." He doesn't say that. And you're looking at him, you'll think, "Wow, he's a real smart guy. He's smarter than me. I should listen to everything he says like it's the gospel truth." And that's how he dupes people, right? But the reality is quite contrary. He could throw out all these fancy words. Gravity waves emit from the center of the particle, and it woos all the people who don't know how that stuff works, right? So anyways, here's well-established scientific principles that contradict Lazar's claims. So, misunderstanding general relativity, curved space-time versus electromagnetic light waves. Lazar's claim. Lazar claims that gravity consists of two distinct types of waves. Gravity A, the strong nuclear force within atoms, and gravity B, the gravitational force that pulls objects towards Earth, and that these can be focused and manipulated like microwaves. The scientific reality is, however, according to Einstein's theory of general relativity, gravity is not a force wave emitted from an atom like a light or a radio wave. Gravity is instead the curvature of space-time. So, is that right to say it's an effect? It's not a force? But anyways, gravity is the curvature of space-time caused by mass and energy, right? So it's an effect that we perceive. We call it gravity, but it's not a force. This is the point. It's not a force wave, emitted from an atom, right? So the contradiction, equating the strong nuclear force with gravity A, is fundamentally incorrect. The strong nuclear force operates only over subatomic distances and is mediated by particles called gluons, while gravity affects everything across infinite distances. There is no mathematical or empirical evidence that the strong force can be converted into space-curving gravity. Next, conservation of energy and momentum. Lazar's claim. The craft generates its own local gravity field to bend space and travel rapidly without experiencing inertia or g-forces. Easy to say stuff like that, right? But the scientific reality is the law of conservation of momentum dictates that an isolated system cannot exert a net force on itself to move without expelling mass or interacting with an external field. The contradiction is that creating a local field that moves a craft without reacting against any external medium or expelling propellant violates both the conservation of energy and Newton's third law of every action begets an equal and opposite reaction. So gravitational waves require astronomical mass. Lazar's claim. A small craft-sized reactor can generate directed gravity waves strong enough to warp space-time locally. However, the scientific reality is that gravitational waves are real, but they are ripples in the fabric of space-time produced by extreme cosmic events involving enormous masses such as the collisions of black holes or neutron stars as detected by LIGO. The contradiction is to warp space-time to the degree required for propulsion would require the mass energy equivalent of a celestial object like a planet or a star, compressed into a tiny space. A microscopic amount of element 115 could never produce the astronomical mass energy required to distort space-time to that extent. So there's real science debunking Bob Lazar's pseudo baloney science, right? Anyway, summary conclusion. Bob Lazar's claims defy physics because they redefine gravity in a way that conflates two entirely different fundamental forces, gravity and the strong force, rely on a chemical element, moscovium, that is physically incapable of remaining stable, and violate fundamental laws of thermodynamics, energy, and momentum conservation. Okay, so it's baloney. Next, the genesis of the Bob Lazar narrative and its predecessors. So Bob Lazar burst into public consciousness in May 1989 through a series of anonymous masked interviews with investigative journalist George Knapp on Las Vegas television station KLAS-TV. Lazar claimed that he had been recruited to work at a clandestine subterranean facility known as S4, located near the United States Air Force installation at Groom Lake, properly referred to as Area 51. According to Lazar, his primary responsibility was to help reverse engineer one of the 9 flying saucers of extraterrestrial origin, which were allegedly powered by a stable isotope of then undiscovered chemical element with atomic number 115. While Lazar presented these claims as novel revelations derived from first-hand government employment, UFOologists, historians of science, and paranormal researchers, people with common sense, have frequently noted profound structural and thematic parallels between Lazar's narrative and earlier UFO Parallels between Lazar's narrative and earlier UFO folklore. That's a tongue twister. Earlier UFO folklore. Okay, right. So thematic parallels between Lazar's narrative and earlier UFO folklore, most notably the Dulce base mythos. Funny that the AI used that term because that's what I call it. But anyways, emerging earlier in the 1980s, the Dulce mythos is that, and I didn't even put that term into the question, I don't believe. Anyways, emerging earlier in the 1980s, the Dulce mythos established a template of secret underground government, alien laboratories, reverse engineering projects, and high-tech military extraterrestrial collusion that predated Lazar's public disclosures by several years. The architecture of the Dulce base mythos. To understand how Lazar's theories mirror or draw upon the Dulce mythos, one must examine the origins of the Dulce legend. The mythos centered around Dulce, New Mexico, a small town on the Jicarilla, whatever, Apache Indian reservation. Throughout the late 1970s and early 1980s, rumors began to circulate among fringe researchers, survivalists, and UFO investigators regarding a massive multi-level underground installation supposedly built jointly by the United States government and extraterrestrial beings, often referred to as the Greys. Nearing the end. A few more paragraphs. Key figures in the dissemination of the Dulce narrative include Paul Benowitz, famous, don't need to get too much deeper into that, businessman and physicist, actual physicist from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Benowitz became convinced in the late 1970s and early 1980s, God bless him, he was deluded before Richard Doty went to him, right? But that's a different topic for another time. I'm not getting into that. But anyways, Benowitz became convinced in the late 1970s and early 1980s that electromagnetic signals he intercepted near Kirtland Air Force Base were coming from alien spacecraft in an underground base. So he came up with this before Richard Doty came to him, and before the Dulce mythos was written and sent out to the public. Benowitz shared these ideas widely within intelligence and ufological circles, eventually collaborating with researchers like William Moore and John Lear, the latter of whom would later become a close associate of and promoter of Bob Lazar. By the mid 1980s, the Dulce narrative had matured into a complex, fully articulated subculture. It featured several core tropes: subterranean laboratories, deep underground facilities carved out of remote desert terrain using advanced boring technology, operating entirely outside the traditional military command structures. Secret government alien collusion, secretive pacts where humans traded resources or biological access in exchange for advanced ET technology, reverse engineering, and for advanced extraterrestrial technology. Reverse engineering and advanced physics. Laboratories dedicated to breaking down alien propulsion systems, anti-gravity mechanics, and exotic materials. Compartmentalized security and cover-ups. Threat narratives involving shadowy security apparatuses designed to silence whistleblowers and erase administrative records. Parallels and overlaps between Dulce and Lazar's S4 stories. When Bob Lazar described S4 in 1989, many structural elements of his story closely mirrored the conceptual framework that was already established by the Dulce base lore, courtesy of networks that included John Lear. The table below illustrates these striking similarities. I've left the table out because just the extra time. The John Lear connection and cultural transmission. The bridge connecting the Dulce mythos to Bob Lazar is structural and interpersonal. John Lear, an influential figure in UFO folklore and an early promoter of the Dulce narratives involving Paul Benowitz, which, if I didn't say before, it's got some truths in it, but it's a lot of baloney, okay? And it's deluded a lot of people. Paul Benowitz believed a lot of this stuff himself before Richard Doty ever came to him. I'm not here to speak on Richard Doty's involvement in this. I love Richard Doty. He's a wonderful person, but that's another topic for another time. Right? Where was I in here? John Lear, an influential figure in UFO folklore and an early promoter of the Dulce narratives involving Paul Benowitz, was deeply embedded in the Las Vegas alternative scene where Lazar emerged. Lear was among the first to validate Lazar's claims publicly, integrating Lazar's tales of S4 into the broader tapestry of American UFO conspiracy theories. Scholars of modern folklore note that subcultures developed shared vocabularies and narrative expectations. By the time Lazar introduced his account of Element 115 and flying saucers hidden inside a desert mountain, the American UFO community had already spent a decade digesting stories of subterranean installations and covert military alien projects. Rather than springing from a vacuum, Lazar's narrative adopted a vernacular that the subculture was primed to receive. transforming abstract rumors of New Mexico underground bases into a concrete, highly specific story, i.e., a highly specific bologna sandwich centered on a classified Nevada test site. Okay? Ultimately, whether Lazar independently experienced these phenomena or synthesized pre-existing tropes circulating within his immediate social and fringe research circles remains a central point of debate. However, the conceptual scaffolding of his theories, combining secret underground laboratories, reverse engineering, and government complicity, bore an undeniable resemblance to mythology that preceded him. So there we go, folks. All the major points that I've made before. And I'll just end on this one final note. If Bob Lazar was, for decades now, how many years has it been? 26, 36, 37? We're going on near 40 years, right? Over a third of a century, he has been out there yapping to the world about secret locations, secret military bases. Area 51 was real. And it was top secret for top secret craft. That's real. That's been publicly admitted and declassified, right? So he was talking all that stuff and yapping the yap back when that was still classified. He's out there yapping yap about that. A lot of people knew about Area 51. It's not like he was amazing because he brought Area 51 to everybody's mind. No, right? But the point is he was yapping about it. He was yapping about locations and places, how much of it was true or not, whatever. But he's claiming these things. He's claiming that he worked in secret military programs for advanced weaponry and craft. Okay, plus the extraterrestrial edge. I mean, aliens. That's another level. But I mean, just on the level of working on secret craft. I mean, you could have a secret jet fighter that's top secret, and it's against the law to reveal it or talk about it, right? But we're talking about alien back engineered craft. He's claiming. You know what I mean? Like the highest tech on the planet, and he's out there yapping about it to the whole planet, yapping and naming places and names and all this stuff and laying down the science for it. Even like if any of his story was real and not baloney, this is my point, then he would have been arrested for espionage. You can't go out there and yap about what is secret stuff like that with no repercussions, going on countless interviews and all of this stuff for decades with no repercussions. You have real whistleblowers, little itty bitty people nobody's heard of. They play very insignificant little roles, but they're scared to death to come out because they have NDAs. Bob Lazar has never been able to provide any documentation or NDAs to, you know what I mean? He'd just come out, oh, I was taking part in all the secret stuff. So, but a lot of people have believed him. That's the problem. And there are, I could go into it more, but I don't have time for it, right? There are strong connections and parallels between, and the reason why is because they all lifted information from one another. It's not that they were consciously working together. They may have been, but that would be a conspiracy. But they were definitely, and some of them were working together, like Lear and Lazar, don't get me wrong, but Billy Meyer, Lear, and Lazar, even if they weren't all purposely working together, they were gleaning information and ideas off of one another. Okay, it's a little problematic triangle of Billy Meyer, the foundation of lies and wacky out there concepts, okay, about the aliens and having German names and the names of ancient gods of different pagan religions and all this nonsense, right? Anyways, there's so much I could say about Billy Meyer too, but basing a foundation of that fraud from 1970s, we have Bob Lazar and John Lear. So Billy Meyer came first. He's like the downward point of the triangle. And then out comes Lear and Lazar almost at the same time. Then you got the little completed triangle, and they're feeding off one another. And the scraps of food that are being thrown into that triangle, and they're all gobbling up like hungry hippos, is what is the Dulce mythos, which have been out there for a long time. Most of it is misinformation, disinformation. Okay, there's only some truth in it. Okay, and a lot of it's based on the delusions that Benowitz had himself. And he wasn't the only person to have delusional ideas like that. His are just hyper specific to that place and to the communications he was interrupting. I mean, interceding with, right? But people have had all sorts of ideas and talked about all sorts of things for decades prior to that. So the ideas and the concepts are nothing new to start with. But Benowitz, whether he tried to do this or not, but because of Benowitz, like a starting domino, so to speak, the Dulce mythos came to be. Different people played parts, but then it blossomed and exploded out in growth after that. And so many people latched onto it. But what really fed it at that time period in the 90s was, and going on, right? But especially in the 90s, at that right time in UFOlogy, right? You have technology and internet and all of this and that there, cameras and everything's getting better, right? And you have Lazar and Lear coming out, and they're affirming things, yeah, elements of Meyer, but they're affirming the Dulce mythos, right? And even like the AI said, they changed the whole landscape for UFOlogy. They were so influential. Okay, and then a small person later on was Bill William Tompkins, right? And he's got fabulous stories which are fun to listen to, and who knows how much of it is true and how much of it is false. Some of it sounds pretty far out there and extreme, but some of it could be true, right? But it's very, very interesting. But what Tompkins talks about, his mythos, if you want to call it the Tompkins mythos, is Dulce mythos. Okay, it is Serpo mythos. It's the secret space program and super soldier type. All these different brackets that are on like the fringe of UFOlogy. People where the serious-minded people who want serious evidence take these things the least seriously on the fringe. All of those fringe topics happen to be latching together like shared octopus arms, right? From one octopus. That's the reality of it, right? Because the secret space program, like all of those individuals talk about, all of these things branch back to the one octopus body, right? Which you could call the Dulce mythos. That's not the head of it, but that's like the bodies of misinformation, of lies and baloney, is that Dulce mythos. One octopus arm going out goes to Bill Tompkins, one goes out to Billy Meyer, one goes out to Bob Lazar, one goes out to John Lear, right? And you have William Cooper, you have even David Icke. I don't even want to include him in this. He doesn't really count, but you know what I mean? But all these different people are just playing into that, right? And the danger of that conspiracy type stuff is it demonizes the government, and it demonizes the police force, and it demonizes the military. It demonizes, and a lot of people, I know where people come from, not physically, but I know where people are coming from. And they say, oh, you can't trust these people. I'm not ignorant, right? I've been there and thought that way before, similar to, but not like other people, right? But I'm just saying, I can relate to what people are saying there. I can appreciate where they're coming from, is what I'm trying to say. But the reality is that the bad characters are few. The rest of them they're just trying to do a good job. They're trying to do their job, right? Not everybody tries hard to do a good job, but you know what I mean? They're just people doing a job. Some of them are trying to do a good job. Most of them are, if not good people, just okay or neutral people. There's only some bad people out there in the world, right? Bad is always the minority, right? So to demonize the whole military as being this corrupt, infrastructure that's, collaborating with evil aliens to abduct people and hybridize with us and take our babies and all this stuff. I mean, I'm not denying some of that does probably happen at the hands of evil extraterrestrials, but it's just the whole. I don't have time to get into it in intricate detail. I've made videos where I talk about this in greater detail, right? But it's the mythos. The mythos is like a package, right? And whether people think of it this way or not, psychologically, this is how it works, because this is how human minds work. There is like a package. And just like with computers, you have like a software program. And within that program, you have lots of little folders, right? So you have the Dulce mythos. In your brain forms thoughts and opinions, and you analyze stuff based on this background framework, which in this case, in most people, is the Dulce mythos, right? So when you're thinking about something or comparing or considering or analyzing, you're going to base things on that mythos that you believe everything and judge everything by, right? But a lot of people believe the Dulce mythos, right? But anyways, I don't have time to keep going on. I got to get going. So anyways, take care, folks. God bless you all, and see you all later.